Welcome to the June 2024 monthly meeting. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your time, and thank you so much for all the hard work you put in this spring. It's been very successful. What I'm going to do is spend a few minutes going through a few announcements, and then we have a speaker, Renee Marsh, excuse me, and we will turn it over to her, and she will talk about what she's an expert in, is garden design. Okay. So we are the Texas Master Gardeners. We're in Bexar County. We provide the county and surrounding community with university-sponsored, research-based, locally relevant information. We have that privilege of doing that across the county, and we've had a very successful spring. Lots of new opportunities, but several old ones. And it's been a great spring, and we're looking forward to getting through the summer and getting into the fall. So we have some upcoming events that we'd like for you to be aware of. The first one is a pretty important one. It's the Texas Master Gardener, or the Bexar County Master Gardener Intern Training, class number 67. It begins on August 21st and will go through November 15th. Classes will meet every Wednesday from 12 to 4, as they always have been, but the schedule will change based upon what they're doing, if they're doing field trips or things like that. The fees are $300 to apply. But the most important thing is that tomorrow is the deadline. So if you have friends, or you're on here and you're not a Master Gardener now and you want to be one, please recognize that tomorrow is the last day for the sign up. And also you will also be subject to a background check. And if you have questions, you can see David Rodriguez's email down below there, and please send him an email and ask your question. Okay, so class 67, tomorrow's the deadline. David will also be speaking on Saturday, the 22nd. He'll be talking about plants, landscape, lawn, and water saving tips. And he'll be at Milberger's Nursery, and it's worth 1.5 CEs if you get a chance to get out there. And I'm sure David will be talking about some of the city council approved some of the water conservation things. So he'll probably be talking about some of those on Saturday. So now I want to introduce Renee Marsh. She is, oh, by the way, if you have questions, feel free to put your questions down in the Q&A and we'll get to them. And if I get to talking too fast, please just put a question in there and say, slow down, and I'm happy to slow down. I was given that advice earlier today that I talked too fast. So my apologies on that. But anyway, Renee Marsh is a garden designer, advanced master gardener, and a horticulturist. She calls herself a plant nut, which is pretty interesting. She believes our gardens should be a healthy ecosystem where people, plants, animals, and insects are in balance. And how true that is. Doing it right means less chemicals, less maintenance, and more enjoyment. She's an owner of the gardening design business called A Simpler Place. For a number of years, she was co-owner of a horticulture and cut flower business, Hilltop Blooms. For 5 years, she was a head gardener for the town of Monroe. I assume that's in Connecticut, where she designed and managed gardens at the parks and town buildings. She teaches gardening class for the New York Botanical Garden and adult education programs, and she speaks to many community groups, including garden club, rights gardening topics, and local publications. In her spare time, she works on her 1803 homestead in Shelton, Connecticut. How exciting. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee. Renee, thank you for your time and for being here with us, and it's all yours.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and, well, thank you everybody for attending and coming to listen to this discussion. You're probably wondering how this person from Connecticut got into this, but I teach at NYBG, and Bill Swatner, who is a Texas Master Gardener, was in one of my classes. And because I'm a Master Gardener too, out of UConn, University of Connecticut, we had a lot in common, and we said, well, why don't you come talk to us about container gardening And I agreed. So I'm glad to be here this evening. And so I do talk fast. I'll try not to talk too fast. And it's interesting because this is actually a 4-week course, 8 hours that I had to like distill down to an hour. So I want to tell you about a lot of things, and I try to focus on the things I think are relevant for wherever you live. I often have people attending from various states, but not too much from the South, I must say, not this far south and not this hot. I live in zone 6, and so my experience is going to be a little different than yours, but I think we all have the same challenges. John was saying how he thought, we had beautiful, growing conditions up here, but actually we don't. We have a lot of rock in Connecticut. We have our issues with weather as well. And we have a lot of deer and other kind of critters. So lots of reasons we grow in containers as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will get this show on the road here. Oops. Hold on. See if I can get this working. Oh, okay. I call this presentation Container Gardening Beyond Annuals because I hate annuals. I don't plant them, I don't grow them. And when they asked me to do a container gardening class, I was like, as long as I don't have to talk about annuals. So annuals are great, and we'll talk about them a little bit. But my interest really in my experience in container gardening is from the fact that I ran a small perennial nursery, and essentially raising plants in containers is container gardening. So I had to learn a lot to do that, and that kind of transfers into, just container gardening for pleasure. And so that's what we're going to talk about. There's a lot of whys that we grow in containers. As master gardeners, we want more plants. So I think the reason I grow in more containers is because I want to put plants in places they shouldn't be, like on walls. I want pretty containers to add to my garden, as part of my design. I think containers add a lot to the landscape. And then you can have another place to put a plant, right? Another plant. Or if you get tired of that, you just put a container in the garden and it looks nice. So a lot of reasons we do it from both a design standpoint, but also because we want to grow things that don't maybe not grow well in our area. For us up here, zone 6, it's a little more of a challenge. There are things I want to grow that aren't hardy in my zone, so I'm putting them in containers. So this is my property. I have 2 acres, but I still grow in containers. I have a lot of deer, as I mentioned before, so I like arborvitae and various conifers that deer like to nibble. But so I'll grow them in spaces where I can manage them and keep the deer away. But plus, I just like to grow things in containers. It's a great and fun thing to do. So the catch with growing in containers is basically you have to provide everything. So of course the fire engine's going by right now. So you have to provide the container, the soil, the food, the water, the protection. Everything has to be done, and you're the person who's going to do it. So in a way, it's a little more intensive and requires more maintenance, but the trade-offs are great. The other catch is really plants don't love growing in containers. It's very stressful for them. So the fluctuations in temperature, in water, in food really does impact plants. So there's ones who do very well and ones who don't. And because I'm not a person who grows a lot of annuals where you don't care because they're dead at the end of the year anyway, at least they are here, a lot of people don't worry about it. But if you want to be a little more adventurous than that, you do have to think about that. So the other thing that I think is good for gardeners growing in containers is you learn a lot more about the root environment and roots of various plants. So for the root environment, a plant needs water, it needs oxygen, and it needs space. And we don't think about that when we're putting it in the ground and it's growing, but when we're gardening in a container, we have to keep all those things in mind. So it's really going to dictate not only the type of container we choose, but the type of growing media we use, aka potting soil, and how often we repot them. And so it's a whole different regiment when we're thinking about the root zone. The other thing important in our area, and probably even in yours, is that for us to grow in pots with a zone 6, we need to have, if I'm going to leave that pot outside, it needs to be 2 zones hardier. So if I want to leave containers outside, those plants need to be hardy to zone 4, because the root zones are not as resilient as the upper part of the plant, right? They're used to a more steady state environment, a kind of, doesn't go much below 30. So if you're putting plants in, they have to be hardier to do 2 zones colder. So that's why I grow a lot of conifers. There's a lot of conifers that do really well in, zone 2, zone 4. And so I can grow them in containers and leave them outside. The other important things with containers is to consider the type of container. So drainage is key. I don't care what anyone says, you cannot grow plants in containers that don't have drainage. And if it doesn't have good drainage, then there's other ways we work around it. One is to drill holes. One may we use a nursery pot inside the container. So we'll look at some of those options, but it needs to have very good drainage. And it needs to have porosity. So the pros of porosity, of course, is that air component we were talking about. It's going to enable more air to circulate around the roots. And for plants that don't want to be that wet, we're going to have that ability to draw off excess water. Of course, down where you are, that's a real con because it's going to dry out more quickly for certain. But for things that are like a dry, well-drained environment like succulents, that's generally not a problem. So there's a lot of options of container types and materials. I don't know about you, but when I first started gardening, I'd go into the nursery and I'd pick a plant and I said, wow, this is a great plant, right? And then I'd spend the rest of the day in the nursery looking for a container to put it in. So here's my advice, just experience. Start with the pot. You're going to have more options of finding a plant to fit in that pot than finding a pot to go with that plant. So especially when you're thinking about where you're going to put that container, what environment it's going in, what your decor is. I always tell my students, gardening is not exterior decorating, but with container gardening, we can push the boundary a little. And we want to have those containers be in sync with, with our design choices. Inside and out. So terracotta, of course, is the standard for most kind of classical gardening. Very big in Connecticut, but unfortunately, in Connecticut, because we have freezing winters and that freeze and thaw cycle will crack and flake the pots. So it's a wonderful container. I love them. They look very natural. There's lots of options, right? They come in all colors, sizes, shapes. So terracotta is great. And the other option, the other part of it that's very nice with terracotta is it tends to be heavy. So if you have winds, we have a lot of people who grow on balconies or grow on roofs, then you have to have something that's going to stabilize a plant. And terracotta does that very well. Of course, concrete's a real asset as well. I see more and more concrete containers. They're porous as well, and they do chip and crack a little bit, but they're a very good insulator and they're very heavy. If you ever visit New York City, you'll see a lot of concrete containers, and the reason is people can't carry them off with the plants in them. But they're, very large concrete containers, but these are actually smaller ones, and you'll see them in places like Pottery Barn and things like that. So concrete is really a look that a lot of people like. It's a very neutral look. But the thing you have to think about with containers and with plants is you need to think about the weight of the pot, the weight of the soil, the weight of the plant, and the weight of all that wet. So unless you're like Martha Stewart and you have a front loader to move your things into the hothouse during the winter months, you're lucky you don't even have to move it, but we would have to move it, and we have to think about how much that weight is. On the other level, if you're into that kind of look and you want something a little less heavy, there's hypertufa, which is simply a mix of peat moss, perlite, Portland cement, and water. It's lighter than stone, ages very gracefully. It's porous. It's a great insulator. and they're really easy to make. So you can find recipes online to make hypertufas. In our garden clubs up here, we'll have little hypertufa parties, and everyone will make them because we can leave these outside. They really overwinter well outside for us. So you can go a little crazy and like have a whole garden of hypertufas, but that's all right because we're all planties right here. The thing I like on the market now, and I've used a lot in when I was in the municipal environment working for a town, is what we call composite pots. These are becoming more and more popular. One, because they're light. Two, because they're actually pretty resistant to weathering. They're a fairly good insulator, so that works well, whether it's hot or. Hold on, I went to move that and got my way there. And now that they're getting really good at it, and they're mixing like stone powder and wood dust in it, they look good. They don't look plastic. They have good details and nice textures. And oh, by the way, some of them can be fairly expensive. But these kind of pots, I think, are really a nice kind of middle ground, unless you want to pay tremendous money for your containers. There's always plastic, low cost, lightweight, generally has a lot of drainage holes. I don't use them if I can avoid it, especially for the fact that the temperature fluctuations are way too big for most plants. They're going to get cold really quick. They're going to get hot really quick. They're nice in a house where you have a more moderated temperature, but certainly outdoors they can be not the greatest thing, and they do degrade. The only thing I'll say for plastic is if we have pots that don't have holes, it allows us to work around that, right? We can put the plastic container in what we call a cache pot that doesn't have a hole, and if we need to water it, we can take it out. So plastic has its, okay. It works for some things, but certainly, if you're doing larger plants, it doesn't work that well. Though I have to say they are making some as well. That do look good from like what I call a 20-footer, right? From 20 feet away, you would not know this was plastic. And because this is in shade and you don't have as much exposure to temperature fluctuations, it's a better option for shade. But certainly for sun, it's not something I would put a plant in. They're not going to be happy campers. And then there's grow bags. So grow bags are really popular because they're lightweight. We can store them. A lot of us up here, and I imagine down there as well, we grow vegetables in them because vegetables are seasonal. When we're done, we can dump them out and put them away and store them. And, they don't take up a lot of room. The other nice thing about grow bags is grow bags allow a lot of oxygen in through the sides. And because of that, what happens is the roots don't wrap. So when roots hit air, they'll stop growing. So rather than getting that wrapping you see in a conventional dark pot, solid pot, it will air prune the roots so you don't get that. And that works really well. And so I use airbags as well if I have containers that I just want to drop a plant into for this season, and then I can pull it back out. So it has a lot of nice features for growing things. Of course, we try to go BPA free if you're growing vegetables and those kind of things on it. And of course, they do dry out fairly quickly. So often putting it in another container keeps you from having to water it like daily. So let's talk about what to grow in our little plants. So I want to talk about potting mix. Potting mix is a really interesting thing. I mean, years ago, there was not this like selection of potting mixes. So really they came about from the horticulture industry, right? Because they started growing container plants to sell in nurseries, to sell to you. And so they had to really fine tune the mixture of what they were growing in. The ideal potting soil holds moisture and nutrients, has a lot of room for air, and provides some anchorage for the roots. So they really kind of, modified it and tried various materials to come up with the ideal potting mix. And you're the beneficiary of that work. So potting mixes, they're not soil actually, so we try not to call them potting soil, but we call them potting media or a potting mix. The vast number of mixes are peat moss. So most of them, the major component is peat moss in them. It's dug from bogs. It has nice high water retention. It's lightweight, so growers like that. The problem is it's not the most environmentally friendly material, and we're trying to get away from it as an industry. But you'll find most, potting mixes are peat moss. So, and show of hands how many people have actually read the back of their potting mix bag to see what was in it. The other thing you'll see in there sometimes is sphagnum moss. It looks a little larger than peat moss, and it has a lot of the same qualities, but it has a lot of the same downsides. Now, what we're trying to do is replace it, and one of the kind of popular replacements for it is coconut fiber or coir, which has high water retention as well. It's a little wetter than peat moss, and they're kind of working on the mixes to make sure they get that balance right. But you'll see a lot of that substitution in there. Unfortunately, that is, that's coming shipped in. We don't have a lot of coconut growing in the US. So there are downsides to it, but it is a little bit more environmentally friendly than peat moss is. And then there's other things that will be in there. There's bark. Often when you have tropical plants, they'll put bark in because it holds a lot of water, gives them good anchorage and a lot of airspace. Rice hulls are a byproduct of the rice industry. They'll put those in. Usually I see them sprinkled on top to cut down on weeds. They'll put compost in. So compost is going to provide some nutrients, and composted chicken manure as well is going to provide some nutrients. But for the most part, the rest of those organic components are not providing any nutrients. They're just providing the base for the roots to grow in. So those are kind of the primary organic components of a potting media. Then there's the inorganic components. We used to see sand in the mixes, but because it's very heavy, a lot of the manufacturers don't put sand in anymore. It increases drainage, and there's a lot of sand down where you are. We have sand here too. It has no nutrients either, but it does help with drainage. The other major component in potting mixes besides peat is perlite. So perlite is a natural product. It's a volcanic product. So they take it, they dig it, they kind of superheat it, and it's that a little white popcorn look. Has no nutrient value whatsoever, but it increases aeration. It's nice, it's lightweight, and that's why we use it. In the past, we used to use a lot of vermiculite, which is also a natural product. It's a mica silicate. But because a lot of the vermiculite was mined in areas that have veins of asbestos in them, we don't use that as much anymore because we're concerned with the asbestos fibers and potential exposure to that. So you'll see less and less vermiculite used and less on the market. So mostly we're going with the perlite. So if you wanted to mix your own, you certainly could. Of course, there's a lot of commercial products out there. As I said, mostly peat moss, perlite. Some of them will add worm castings, and worm castings are going to put a little bit of nutrient in there. Some of the mixes that like Miracle Grow puts out also has fertilizers in it. But you have to read the back of the bag to figure out what is in that mix. As a person who grows a lot still, or in the past grew a lot of plants in containers, there's something called ProMix. So ProMix is the usual suspects here: sphagnum peat moss, perlite, vermiculite, a wetting agent. Peat is very hydrophobic. It will repel water. So they'll put in a wetting agent to help make it easier to moisten that product. And then the mycorrhizae, they're making everybody feel good, and they're putting in some mycorrhizae to help in the root zone with the plants. How good that is or is not in a container is kind of debatable, but it's in there. And you can see, interestingly enough, there is the BX, which is the common one, is perlite. Is peat moss, and the ProMix, the CC, is coir. So there you can see they're starting to phase this out. Now, if you're crazy about potting, this is how big a ProMix is. This is the back of my Prius. What else would I drive? And so it's, it's a very big block of potting media, but it's great to have. You can certainly buy it and share it with your friends and family. So that's how I buy mine and put it in a large trash can. So there are other formulated potting mixes. As I said, they're kind of doing them in smaller portions. This is Pro Mix for the homeowner, I guess. Again, sphagnum peat moss, ortquar. Some of them are having a polymer gel added. So that the thinking behind the polymer gel is that it absorbs water and pulls it into the container. In general, I would avoid that. I don't think it works that well. Number one. Two, we don't need any more microplastics in our soils. So I think it's a gimmick. There's perlite. They add limestone to just make it neutral. Most potting mix is neutral, so it's going to be a very neutral mix. Some of them add a controlled release fertilizer that we'll talk about. And again, they'll add mycorrhizae as well. So it's really interesting when you buy a mix. You, as master gardeners, and I think as really good gardeners, you need to start being aware that the mix is very generic. And yeah, you can use it straight out of the bag and it's great for annuals. But if you're going to start growing things that are maybe outside of that envelope, you need to learn how to adjust your mix. So this is, I bought a plant. It was a Dracaena. And this is the root ball of the Dracaena. So I took it out of the pot. This is what the grower's mix was. And you can see how much perlite was in that mix. And below it is a potting mix, a standard potting mix that came out of a bag. And you can see how little perlite is in it. So all I have to do is look at those two and say, I better increase the perlite because this plant is going to want more drainage than that potting mix is going to give it. And it's something you kind of learn as you go along, but I'll give you a couple of kind of tips on how to modify or improve your potting media. So if you take your standard potting mix, I always add 3 handfuls of perlite because I find it drains better. I'd rather have a plant that I have to water more than a plant that ends up, root rotting because the drainage is poor. And I also add 2 handfuls of organic fertilizer. So I'll use an Espoma product for that. If I want a high octane recipe, if you're growing like annuals and you just want those suckers to blast through and bloom all the way, add another 2 handfuls of organic fertilizer and 3 handfuls of dried chicken manure, and that'll blast those things right out. Usually if I'm growing annuals or something that's going to flower continuously, up that phosphorus. So there's an Espoma flower blend, flower tone, which has a high phosphorus and potassium, which is really good for those kind of plants. And then there's a succulent version. So if you're growing succulents, you want to start a little differently. There's generally not enough drainage for succulents, so I add handfuls of perlite. I also add compost instead of fertilizer. And the reason is succulents don't like a lot of nutrients. So the compost is kind of like slow food. It's going to give them some nutrients, but it's not going to over fertilize them. And I like to increase it also with some river sand. So it'd be interesting to know how many of you kind of have figured out you really need to modify these mixes depending on what you're growing. And just play with it and see what works for you. I think it's a good tool to learn, especially if you do a lot of propagation, then you can really improve your mix based on what you're trying to grow. Okay, I don't see any questions in the chat, which means I'm either talking too fast. Okay, let's talk about feeding since we talked about fertilizers. Feeding is, there's a lot of options on how do you fertilize containers. So the question is, what do you fertilize? When do you do it? How often? There's options of water soluble, think of the blue stuff, versus controlled release, think of osmocote. And then there's organic versus synthetic fertilizers. So I don't use synthetic fertilizers generally for much of anything in my garden. But if I'm using containers and growing things that are going to be an annual, I will sometimes opt for a synthetic because synthetics are immediately available in the soil for the plant, where an organic fertilizer may take a little bit of time, to get released into the soil, and that is a process. So water-soluble fertilizing, I think we've all seen this. You can buy it, you mix it with water, always do it correctly, to the instructions. Water the soil thoroughly to reduce the risk of burning plant roots. That's the other downside with synthetic fertilizers. They are a salt, and you can absolutely burn the roots of plants. That's not going to happen with an organic fertilizer, but it can with synthetic. And then we usually will water it first, let the water drain out, and then you feed it. So you don't put water with a soluble fertilizer in a dry pot. So you want that soil to be moist before you do that. I'm a big fan of, if I'm going to do a water soluble, I use fish fertilizer. I will tell you this, if you're having a garden party that night, do not use fish fertilizer. Fish fertilizer smells like fish. It does wear off after a while. The smell will kind of dissipate, but the first shock of it is like, yep, that's fish. And oh, by the way, the raccoons like it. So you might take that into account if you have a lot of raccoons and skunks around. They come to investigate. They're like, where's that fish? I'm going to eat that. And they don't find it, but they'll dig through your pot to get it. There's a lot of products out there with different ratios. These are Espelma products, and they're liquid fertilizers. And they're kind of right. They're changing the NPK values, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, depending on what you're growing. I find just their general growing one is fine. If you want bloom, you can do that. If you want to try the different ones, but they're really just tweaking the ratios of the macronutrients a little bit. And so there's not huge differences, but certainly just a little bit. Let me see this out. Hold on. Hold on. I'm going to go through that. So Grow 222 is probably the best kind of all-around one. You can see the bloom, that spike in the phosphorus to encourage blooming. And so you might want to use that for your annuals. So that's a water-soluble fertilizer. Mix it in water, dump it in. Then there's controlled release fertilizing. And controlled release fertilizers are essentially little pellets. Most of them are traditionally were actually a plastic pellet. So they have a plastic coating. The fertilizer is inside. The water has to penetrate through the membrane to dissolve the fertilizer. So they have to be exposed to water. You can't just dump them on the top of the soil in the pot. It's also temperature dependent. If it's cold, it's going to take slower time for them to release. And the plastic coating is great because most of them in the past were synthetic fertilizers, and it kept you from over fertilizing and from burning the roots of the plant. So when you see a controlled release fertilizer, Osmocote's probably the one that's been on the market and most people know. The pellets, oh, by the way, the pellets remain. Those little piece of plastic pellets, you can still see them. Doesn't mean there's any fertilizer left in them. They don't dissolve away. So you just have to keep track of when you fertilize. Osmocote usually lasts 6 months. So if you want to do it in a container, that's great. I do it in containers, but I don't use this in my garden. I don't think it's necessary, and plus it's a synthetic fertilizer. But for container plants, it's great, especially annuals or vegetables. It works really well. There is an organic slow release that has come on the market. Job's has one out. The only place I've been able to find it is Walmart, and it is great. It doesn't last quite as long. It lasts about 3 months. So you mix it into your pot, and in 3 months, and this does dissolve all the way away. So they have different strengths as well, depending on what you're growing. So to me, the best approach for most containers is I will put in a controlled release at about half the recommended rate, and then I'll supplement with liquid at half the recommended rate. And the reason I like to do that is because I can pretty much ensure that everywhere in the pot there is going to be some fertilizer for the roots. So the pellets may not have mixed in as well. So I like to kind of hedge my bets and fertilize with both. And the important thing is too, especially when you're using synthetic fertilizers, which you get that salt buildup, you'll see it crusting on your pots. Just every so often, just give them a good rinse, fill it, flood the entire space of the pot, let all the water drain out, and then just do that without adding any additional fertilizer, because it does accumulate in the soil, especially the synthetic ones. So you have to be careful with that. Okay, no questions. You guys are a quiet bunch. All right, let's talk about some planting care and maintenance. Here's the biggest myth around, which we all learned from our, other gardeners, was to put gravel in the bottom or shards of pot to increase the drainage. Not exactly how it works. So what you do when you have gravel in the bottom of the pot here is it actually pushes up the water because of the capillary action, going from very small capillaries in the soil to the bigger pores in the rock. It really doesn't do that. Think about a sponge, right? If you pick up a sponge and hold it, it's got a lot of water in there, but it's not going anywhere. So that's the same. So if you want to use the entire pot space for the plant, you really don't have to put anything in here. If you have a large pot that those roots aren't going to go down that far anyway, then you don't have to worry about it. But, the best thing actually is to just leave it out. You can put a little piece of, a piece of pottery or something on the bottom to keep the soil from draining or just to keep it from getting clogged. But by and large, you don't have to do that anymore. If you don't want to. Okay, and I think I have a question. Yeah, question. I have an azalea organic fertilizer that's 543, but don't have azaleas. Can I use it on regular houseplants? Yes, you can, Melanie. Plants, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It's a ratio that's good for azaleas, but it's still the basic macronutrients that any plant needs. So yes, go ahead and use it on your house. All right. And oh, by the way, if you buy those really tall pots and you need to fill something in the bottom, a lot of us used to use milk jugs, and we'd fill them and put the lids on them and just take up space on the bottom so we don't have to use a ton of potting media. Somebody sent me this. This was during the pandemic. They said they've converted over to this pot filler. Yeah, we did a lot of drinking during the pandemic. But it works really well because you can put them in the bottom of the pot. If you clean out the pot, you just take them out, you rinse them off, and you can reuse them. And I think it's a nice way to recycle your corks if that's your thing. Okay. The other thing I want you to be aware of when you're potting up is over potting. So everybody has a tendency to go, oh, I don't want to have to pot that plant up later. I'm just going to put it in a big pot and let it grow. Okay, it works well for annuals or plants that go really quickly, right? Or even vegetables, right? They're going to put on a lot of growth. They're going to grow a lot of roots. If you're doing other plants like perennials or trees or conifers, they have a much slower growth rate. That water is going to stay in that soil for a long time, and you have a real chance of just drowning that pot. It's just going to overwater and you're going to get rot. So when you're doing those kind of plants, 1 to 2 inches wider than the container that it came at, not much deeper. And then, yes, you're going to have to pot up because you're going to have to give them time to fill that pot. If you have a fast growing thing, ornamental grasses just go, you can ignore my advice there. But if you have a slower growing plant, you just want to be careful about that. I used to use, cut up pool noodles, yes, on the bottom of pots. Are there any additional issues with those? No. Pool noodles work. I know a lot of people who use pool noodles, especially when they have those very tall containers. They work just fine. As long as, just put them in a way that they're not going to block drainage. The important thing on the planting steps, I think you've all potted up a plant, so I'm not going to belabor this. But one of the things that even I sometimes don't do is pre-moistened mix. Add everything in, mix it outside, wet it, and then plant the plant. If you put a lot of these mixes, especially BX, is very dry because they're vacuum packed. If that mix is dry, it's going to be very difficult for it to moisten once you put it in the container. So pre-moisten the mix, make sure it's good. The other thing is it keeps your plants from sinking, and there's nothing a plant likes less than being planted too deep. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and pre-moisten that mix before you get that plant in there. And then you always want to leave room on top for watering and for top dressing. And we'll talk about top dressing. So top dressing is kind of a nice little addition. Oh, I'll hit this first before I change the page. When you do all this and you've potted up, you've watered it to settle the soil, and you've top dressed, don't use liquid fertilizers for 3 weeks. Why? Because generally we've been messing with the plant roots. We've damaged a lot of the root hairs. It's going to take time for those root hairs to recover. So if you're just wasting your liquid fertilizer, you can do it. It's not going to absorb a lot of it because the root hairs aren't there to do that job. But the best thing is just give it a couple of weeks to recover before you do that. So let's talk about top dressing. Top dressing is my favorite way of decorating containers. Why do we do it? Because it retains moisture. It keeps things from splashing out. We get weeds in containers. And more importantly, in my area, I have squirrels known as tree rats, chipmunks, all kinds of things that want to dig in containers, skunks. And I find top dressing will keep them out of my containers. So bark, if it's something that likes moist, it's nice to give them bark nuggets, increases the fungal mycorrhizae in the pot. Moss is great. You can use anything you want. Pool balls, nutshells, seashells are fine too. Just rinse them off. And of course, it just gives us an opportunity to put more plants in a container. So these are my 2 containers. And I was like, oh, I need something on the top of this container. And so we just threw some more plants in there. And who doesn't want more plants? Okay. All right. I got that question done. Good. All right. So talking about plants, let's talk about what to grow. I'm going to share with you my favorite things to grow in containers. I actually did go and look and I'm like, what do they grow in zone 9? So let's look at some options and you can tell me if I'm dead wrong. So one of the things I love is to grow any kind of large trees or tall shrubs in containers. I think they're really like sculpture. They create a canopy. They can be deciduous or conifers. The only thing you have to think about is what the root structure for that plant is. You don't want to plant a plant that's going to grow a huge root structure. So a lot of the maples, especially the Japanese maples, have very small root structures. They do very well. Think about the container weight, right? So this is a cement or a concrete pot. You want to make sure it's got enough weight to balance that. And you have to think about root pruning when you're doing this. And of course, we're going to think about hardiness zones. So let me give you a couple of examples. Japanese maples and vine maples apparently do very well down there. And there are maples, I was out on the maple website looking at this, and there are maples that don't do it in zone 9, but there are enough that do that you could certainly grow a nice Japanese maple in the container. I think they have a lot of structure. There's all kinds of different opportunities. There's dwarf ones, there's red ones, there's green ones, there's cut leaf. You know, you can drive yourself crazy just looking through the options with maples. The other thing I like to grow in my containers is Ilex crenata. Boxwood is not in the question anymore. Between boxwood blight, psyllid, and now we have boxwood moth. Boxwoods are not there, but I love that look. So my favorite go-to, which does well in zone 9, is Japanese holly, Ilex crenata. From far away, nobody knows it's not a boxwood. And you can prune it into all kinds of shapes. This is an example of Japanese cloud pruning, so you can, really channel your design sense through Ilex crenata. Who has a question? When repotting a plant, why do you not say not to press the new soil down? You can press it down lightly. I discourage it because people tend to want to press very hard and they start compacting the soil. For the same reason we don't stomp plants when we plant them in the ground, right? We don't want to compact the ground around the roots. We want it to settle in nicely. And so watering it in does that better than trying to push it with your fingers. What do you consider about root pruning? What does it mean? Cut the roots back. Oh, yes. So root pruning, that's a big discussion. I might leave that. Root pruning is exactly what it sounds. You take the plant out of the container, you rake the roots out. So you pull the roots out because they're probably wrapped, and then you prune them. You just cut them as you would prune something above ground. You prune the roots off, put it back in a container, just the way they do bonsais. Put it back in a container, protect it a little bit and baby it a little bit, and then it will recover. And you can keep it in one size container. Otherwise, if you tried to pot it up all the time, the containers would just get too large. Here's a little example. Granatas and maples, things you can do with containers. If you're into flowering things, reblooming lilac does very well in containers. Hydrangeas do very well in containers. Of course, the panicle hydrangea, paniculata, is going to take a lot more sun than other plants, other hydrangeas will take. It's more of a sun lover. But Proven Winners, if you've ever been out on the Proven Winners website, they're really into making sure that we have dwarf plants now to fit in our landscapes. And so those dwarf plants do absolutely beautifully in pots as well. And I'm a real sucker for what's called a standard. So a standard is a plant that's been pruned to a single stem, and then all the foliage and the flowers are up top. And hydrangeas do this really well, especially panicle hydrangeas. And they just look like stunning, you know, kind of stunning. I don't know if it's a Connecticut look. I think you'd like that down there too. You know, it's that very formal look, but it's really, really handsome. And oh, by the way, because you have that pruned all the way up, you can actually put a lot of nice little more flowers and more things in the bottom of that container. So that's standards. And they sell a lot of standards now. They sell lilacs and standards as well. And if you want to go into the, you know, into the fruit mode, this is one of my favorite fruits in a container. This is black chokeberry, Aronia melanocarpa. Wonderful little plant that just, you know, there is a dwarf version and it is just a handsome plant. You probably, if you don't pick it fast, you probably won't get many of them. Actually, the birds don't like it because it's a little tart, but other things do, and you can eat them as well. And they really make a handsome little plant. A lot of people do blueberries, but I find that the chokeberries it's a more handsome plant. And then there's evergreens. I am just a sucker for evergreens. There's many forms of evergreens. There's round and mounding and pyramidal. And I know I did have to look at this. There are some of our evergreens are just not going to do well down in zone 8 and 9, but there are some that will. And so to me, as a container person, foliage is forever. So, you know, flowers are nice, but most things are only going to flower for a certain amount of time. So if I want real structure in a container, I'm going for conifers, and they come in kind of all sizes and shapes and colors. So you can find anything and things that are hardy down into 8 and 9. In the conifer world, there are things called miniature conifers and dwarf conifers. So miniature conifers really will stay very small for 10 years or so. So conifers never stop growing. What differentiates miniatures from dwarfs from full size is how fast they grow. So miniature conifers and dwarf conifers are very slow growing, which means they can be in a container for a long time. Now the question in here, do we get copies of these slides? Yes, you do. I should have mentioned that up front. Yes, I will send copies, and if you want a copy, you're welcome to have them as reference. So here's a couple that I found out there. This is a really nice little Sitka spruce. Does well in zone 9. So a lot of them are rounded. This is very globose, so that would look very nice in a container. Really hardy in your zone. Junipers are very hardy up here and very hardy down your way as well. So this is a beautiful compresso, which is a, you know, the garden size is 3 feet by 1 feet, 2 to 4 inches a year it grows, right? So it would be a really nice vertical element in a container or in front of your door, and a lot less maintenance than other things. So I like to go on garden tours, and I always like to take note of them. And as I said, I'm a standards girl, and here are standards of spruce. So you can do your conifers that way, or you can do them this way. If you ever want to visit up this way, we're pretty green. We had a very nice rainy spring, and this is actually the Berkshires in Massachusetts, but I just adored that little pond in that container. You can do perennials. So if you're thinking about doing perennials, herbaceous perennials, just think about the root structures, think about what it requires. Remember, they're all fairly short growing season. So you're going to rely on foliage over flower, and you can always recycle them into your garden if you want. So they do very well. I tend to like to use the perennials, the herbaceous perennials like hosta and ferns, because they're going to look good all the way through the season before ours go dormant. So again, foliage over flower is a great thing. Ferns are wonderful in containers. I know there's ferns down there as well. So I'm a big fern person. And then a lot of people like to do grasses. So be careful with grasses. Grasses grow really quickly in containers. For the most part, I'll give you one that doesn't. So watch the root structures on that. Sometimes I'll do like our switchgrass, our native grasses, and boy, they'll fill a container in a season. It's like, woof. So you just have to be careful of that. And remember that there's cold and warm season grasses. There's grasses that look good nice in the spring, or some that take off a little later. So you have a lot of choices. For hardiness zone, you probably don't have to worry. The only thing I'll point out with grasses, let me point this out. As I said, they'll fill a pot really quickly. What is the problem with this pot? So you're either going to break the pot, or you're going to go in there with like a reciprocating saw to try to get that grass out of there. So if you're going to do grasses in container, bottom narrower than the top, just a little guidance there is something you want to think about. Have the voice of experience there, guys. Done that, been there. I like blue fescue. It's a cool season grass, so it looks nice early in the season. Really can't beat that blue. Does very well in containers. If you want something for shade with that kind of grassy look, Hakone Chloa or Hakone grass does really well in shade. And oh, by the way, it is a very slow growing grass, so it's not going to overpower other things in the containers. It plays well with others. So that's an option for shade. Another option for shade is Japanese sedges. We use a lot of sedges now in our gardens, caryxes. It's the caryx family, and they too do very nice in containers and nice in shade. We have a lot of shade here. We have a lot of trees, so we do like things that do well in shade. Where in San Antonio can we buy these plants? That is not my question. And do you have a list of these plants? As I said, you will get the charts. I can probably put a list together that I can share as well as the charts. So how are we doing time-wise? So succulents. One of the things, I'm not even going to talk to you guys about succulents. I mean, for us, succulents are a big thing. For you, everything's a succulent growing down there. But we do have succulents that we like to use up this way. My favorite is Yucca filamentosa because it is actually hardy in zone 6. This is color guard. It's a beautiful succulent. So we like to use them. Hens and chicks are okay in our neck of the woods too. We use a lot of sedums as well because zone 6 is a little tougher. So this is interesting. I'd be interested if anyone can identify this. I actually got in trouble. I took this picture in Long Island, and I had it in my charts, and I identified it as something. And the New York Botanical Garden, the plant police said, Renee, that's not what it is. So I actually thought it was an agave. What do I know? I live in Connecticut, but it is actually a giant false agave. I had never seen one before. Beautiful plant. I'm sure it will do very well. Here we're going to have to put that in a greenhouse. And of course, you can put sedums wherever you want. A little whimsy in the garden is a nice thing. Herbs, let me just say this about herbs. If you haven't grown them in containers before, do not believe what they give you in the grocery store. They'll mix moist herbs and dry herbs together. Moist herbs like parsley, basil, and chives, they all want nice, rich soil, a lot of moisture, grow them together. Dry herbs, oregano, thyme, sage, those things are dry. They want to be, they want to be in a terracotta pot. They don't want any fertilizer, so grow those together. And of course, if you have thugs like mint and lemon balm, you want to grow them in a container and just keep an eye on them so they don't escape. An important thing for good drainage for your containers, especially for succulents and for dry plants that like dry soil, is to have pot feet. These are little feet that go under your pot, and they kind of raise it up and increase the drainage. And that's a good thing to do. Okay, let me see here. There we go. The other thing are rosemary and bay. Of course, you can leave those out. They do very well in containers as well. I've had a bay in a container for 25 years, and I bring it in and root prune it every year. So you can keep them in containers and root prune them to keep them in size. And then there's a lot of summer bulbs. In our area, of course, we have to dig these, but a lot of these you can leave in the soil. So cannas, elephant ears, that's another canna with caladiums, I know do real well in the heat. So they're a nice addition to containers. So a lot of the summer bulbs are quite nice. I know you would have a big problem with our spring blooming bulbs, but the summer bulbs will work for you. And then there's always water gardens. If you have any water, I heard you did get rain. So even I like to have water gardens because it's easier to keep them. You can tell how much water is there. And if you're going away on vacation, you can usually fill in enough so they don't dry up. So water gardens, I just want to point out that there are things to discourage mosquitoes that are not harmful, like mosquito bits and mosquito dunks. And we're very careful in our waterways of making sure that none of these plants, some of which are invasive in our native waterways, get out of control and get where they're not supposed to be. And papyrus, I'm a big fan of papyrus. It looks wonderful in containers. And also horsetail. Do not ever put this in the ground in your garden. It will just rock your world. But in a container, it is a fine looking plant. And then annuals, as I said, check out provenwinners.com. They have great applications that will help you select various plants to put in containers together and do design. And it's a nice website, if you're into the container thing, and put it on a pedestal. Anything looks good on the pedestal. More pedestals and more pedestals. All right, I am going to call it there, I think. John, I wanted to open it up to any more questions.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. So thank you, Renee. So if there's any more questions, I think you have another question, Renee. You got a couple more.
Okay.
You want me to look them up for you, or you want to go to them yourself?
My phone would have to ring right now. Okay.
All right, let's see what we got here. The first one says, I use, let's see, no, wait a minute,
I
hold on a second.
think I got most of them.
Okay, when repotting, why did you say not to? You did that one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Okay, hold on. Here we go. You have it. What is thugs?
Thugs. What are thugs? Okay, so thugs. Thugs are plants that don't play well with other. And generally, they're plants that grow very quickly. And we don't generally like to use them in the garden unless we can control them and stop them. But they are often great plants. And if you have an area where you want something to fill in, that's a thug. I call it a thug versus an invasive plant because in the master gardener world, invasive plants are very specific. They're plants that are on an invasive species list. We don't, they get out into our natural ecosystems, they do a lot of damage. So a thug would be mint as a thug. If it has the right conditions, it will just walk right through your garden, but it is not going to get into our native gardens and cause our native ecosystems and cause damage. So those are thugs versus invasive plants. So I just, especially when I'm talking to master gardeners, I'm careful about my terminology.
There's one other question. It says, what were the two thugs that you showed in your herb group?
The two thugs are mint and lemon balm. So mint and lemon balm. Mint is a rhizome spreader. It also will reseed. So that's one of them. So we usually grow it in containers just so it doesn't get out of control. And lemon balm is the same. And lemon balm is a big reseeder. So if you're going to grow lemon balm, make sure you can control the seeds as well. So, you know, and I don't know if you have a problem down there. We have a problem with bamboo. People put in bamboo, and bamboo is a big rhizome spreader. It's a big problem. It has a nice look. If you want to grow it, put it in a container and control it.
Wow. Well, I don't see any more questions, Renee. So thank you. Got lots of thank yous. So thank you so much. Very well done. I have to say, I've started container gardening myself, and I learned more here. I got to get a copy of your slides because I don't do what you did, and mine are looking kind of weak, so I need to fix it. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
I was glad to share it with my fellow master gardeners and others.
Well, you have a great evening, and you're welcome to leave the meeting if you like. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. I'll send the charts off in a day or two.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Okay. That was very well done. Very well done. So let me just go back before I get started here again. I made a mistake, and I appreciate the correction. When I said it's $300 to go to the class to the number 67, it's not $300 to file. It's $300 if you get in the class. So sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion about that. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. Rhonda, if you don't mind, would you just check that for me every once in a while? I appreciate it. So thank you again for being here, and thank you for the time you spend, all the work you've done. Let's talk about some news that we have for you. So just a quick update from David. David says, thanks to all the hard work for the great spring that we had, all the new opportunities and all the stuff that went on was well done. He also said the top tomato was another very big successful year. So thank you for all you who participated in that. And Dave is very appreciative of all the work and all the effort that you guys have put in over this past few months. Next one is Butch. Butch is not here, so I'm going to go over his slides. The first thing is we've had a very successful May. We ended the month with $1,986.60 of net income. And the positive drivers were, we had a 7% match with the Valero Texas Open, and which netted us $2,523.24. And then we also received $1,060 from CD interest. For expenses, we paid $636.55 for plant sales. And those are the 3 Earth Day events that we did. Additionally, the other major expenditures were salaries and wages and the back office, and that was $2,874.55. And so where we are for the year through May, very successful so far. We have a balance of $66,585 through May. So it's been a very successful year so far with our finances. So thank you for Bush does a great job taking care of this, and we're had a very successful May and very successful first part of the year. Recertification requirements for 2025. You can see this is 30 volunteer hours, 6 CEUs, 2 monthly meetings, and that's 1 CEU per meeting. If you have any questions about that, please contact Owen, and he's more than happy to answer your questions and help. He corrects me pretty often in my filing of VMS, so I appreciate all the hard work he does. Class 66, you will need to certify upon you will certify upon completing 50 volunteer hours. And I know many of you are on that track. So Susan Noonan is giving out the new Texas Superstar badge. It's pretty cool. If you've seen it, it's really neat. And So again, the recertification is 30 volunteer hours, 6 CEs, and 2 monthly meetings. And you can pick yours up when you get certified. You can pick it up from Susan at one of the in-person monthly meetings. It's a really neat little Texas state and the Texas Superstars across. Is really a nice looking pen. So I hope you enjoy that. Susan's doing a great job of tracking that. So those that get the recertification pin. So Ron Wright, we apologize, was left off last month. He's in the class 66 and he's certified in May. So we left him off. So he's top bill here in this month. And apologize for that, Ron. So the list is Terry Bills, Leslie Butterworth, Mary Calderon, Kimberly Casillas, Mary Synonimo, Mary, Mary Fernandez, Judy Frisch, Noel Guibert, Yvette Ham, Michelle Haney, Michelle Hobbs, Sarah Holland Adams, Lou Kellogg, James or J.R. Wright, Marie LeBlanc, we'll call Ron Lee, but he's really Butch Lee to me. Butch Lee, Lynn Yen Lu, Santos Menchaca, Charles Mims, Levon Mims, Ann Moss, Scott Peacock. And you'll notice that the class 66 was out its parentheses there. Marvin Perkins, Kathy Portelli, Mary Quant, Marie Sabatera, John Sells, Ted Tregas, John Payne, Mario Ward, Judy Warren, Sandra Woodall. Okay, so there were some questions that were brought up earlier this week about what the certification was. So the certification is from December 1st, 2023 through May 31st, 24. So it was through the end of May. So if you certified after May 31st, you will show up in the July monthly meeting. So or on the July stars website. So sorry about that. There was some confusion about that. So the reporting period is from December 1st, 23 through May 31st. So, okay. If there's any questions about that, please feel free to bring it up. Okay, VMS changes for 2025. First one is VMS hours and CEs recorded from December 23 to December 24 will go toward 2025 certification. So that's December 23 through December 2024 will go towards 2025 certification. The next one is beginning in January 2025, VHS, your volunteer hours and your continuing education recorded from January 1, 2025 through December 31st, 2025 will go toward your 2026 certification. Hope that makes sense. Beginning in January 25, the volunteer hours and continuing education will start January 1st, 2025, not December 2024. And they will go through December 31, 25. And that will be for your 2026 certification. And then the last one is also beginning in January 25 to recertify. We've had to raise the hours based from Texas Master Gardeners recommendations and guidelines. We have to go to 35 volunteer hours, 10 CEs, continuing education, and 2 monthly meetings. So this is part of what the Texas Master Gardeners have asked us to go toward is beginning January 2025, recertification with 35 volunteer hours, which is 5 more than we have now, 10 CEs, which is 4 more CEs, continuing education, and 2 monthly meetings. We have some questions. Let me look at the questions real quick. Okay. Don't we have until November to get certified? Yes, the answer to that, yes. You have until December 31st to be certified. Yes, you do. You go from December 2023 to December 2024 to be certified for December for the year 2025. If we're recording hours from December 23 through December 24, that's 13 months. Is that accurate? That is correct. Yes, it is accurate. It doesn't make sense that people are certified for 2023 now. I don't think I understand the question. It does not make sense that people are certified for 2023 now. You're actually certified if you put hours in December 1st through December 31st, 2023, those hours count for 2024, not 2023. So December 1st to December 31st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024, those go toward 2025 certification. Confused about this time frame for 2024. Okay. So I don't know what else do we need to do here. So the certification for 2024 was from, what was last year? That's a good question. I have to look that one up. That's good for 2024 certification. Anybody know the answer to that? Sure. Yes, I'm confused with the question. The 2024 certification began December 1st, 2023 through Owen, are you on? He's not on. I'll have to send you a note about that. I'm confused about time. Then it says 2025. Okay, so you're confused about the 2025 certification. Okay. 2025 certification is from December 1st, 2023 through December 31st, 2024. Gets you the 2025 certification. The list of people just received certification. That's right. They were certified. I think we're certified for 2024 if we met the requirements for 2023. Okay. BHS were recorded and volunteer hours and CEs are recorded from December 23 through December 24, go toward 2025 certification. The people that we have certified here are getting 2025 certification because they have completed 30 volunteer hours, 6 CEUs, and 2 monthly meetings. Is that clear? So, and then beginning in January 2025, the volunteer hours and continuing education recorded from January 1, we're changing the hour requirement, the hour months to get back on a calendar year. In January 2025 through December 31st, 25, we'll go to the 26 certification. Hope that makes sense. Of course. Okay. So 2024 certification would have been earned from December 22 to November 23. That is correct. That is correct. So the 2024 certification was earned from December 22nd, December 22 to November 30th, 2023. So the people that were shown on this, these people here were shown because they have completed the certification for 2025. They've already done 30 hours, 6 CEUs, and 2 monthly meetings. Okay, I hope that's clear. Yes, okay, I think that's all the questions. Sorry about that. Okay, so the background checks. We appreciate all the patience of you who have gone through this background process. It has not been a fun process for you. I apologize for that. It's just what the Texas Master Gardeners have decided to go through. And we appreciate the way you've gone through it. And I know there's been a lot of effort put in by several people to try to make it understandable. So thank you for going through the process. We've sent our comments back to the Texas Master Gardeners. Unfortunately, we still have to go through the same process until something else changes. So right now, we're going to continue to go through the same background process as we went through before. So we're going through now, and hopefully at some point, there'll be some changes made. But right now, this is where we are. And okay, I have another question. Okay, essentially, we have an entire year to get certified for the upcoming year, which is 2025. That is correct. You have from, to get certified for 2025, you have from December 2024. I'm sorry, from December 2023 through December 2024 to get certified for 2025. That is correct. Okay, there's several questions that we've been getting that we wanted to kind of update you on. The first one is some of these questions. This is how you would get those answers easier and faster. So I'm not getting the leaflet or the sign-on. Please contact the comm team at bearmg.org. I need to go to the office to pick up equipment for a presentation. Contact the office at bearmg.org. When is the next lunch and learn? Learn at bearmg.org. I found an error in the leaflet or the sign-on. Comment, send a note to the comm team. I'm not going to attend the lunch and learn after all. So you signed up and you decided not to do it after all. Please do learn at bearmg.org. So let me go back over this one more time. I'm not getting the leaflet or sign-on. Check the comm team at bearmg.org. I need to go to the office, pick up equipment, office at bearmg.org. And when's the next lunch and learn? Learn in bearmg.org. I found an error in the leaflet or sign-on, the comm team at bearmg.org. And then I'm not going to attend the lunch and learn after you signed up. Learn at bearmg.org. Okay. In case you missed it, our old buddy here has moved on. Nick has gone on. He's gone on to new opportunities. So we wish him the best. He was a great help in everything we did with him. Super guy. He's moved on to new opportunities. So in case you missed it, in case you wanted to know, Nick is no longer with us. The office hours are on Mondays 9 to 1, Wednesdays 9 to 1, and then Fridays 9 to 12. Majority of you have met Lynn. She's doing a great job. Just please email her at officemanager@bearmg.org if you have questions or you'd like to stop by and pick up equipment or just pick up anything you need, any kind of the forms or things. Just please email her and she will email you right back very quickly. She's doing a great job. You have to have it. Well, you have to have she'll give you an appointment, but she's pretty flexible. So be sure you email her and then she'll give you an appointment time, but she's usually very flexible. So if you have questions of the board, these are the board members: Leanna, John Van, Butch, Peggy, Kathy, Linda, and Linda Case. Linda, and then Kate, Linda Case. I mean, sorry, Nancy, Nancy Mills, and Linda Case. This is how you'll record Renee Marsh, Thursday, June 20th at 6 o'clock. And you get 1 CE, bureau code 002. Description will be container gardening with Renee Marsh. Any questions or comments? Sorry for the confusion over the certification. I think we got it right now. Hopefully we did. If we did, you can send me an email or you can send an email to the board and we'll get it right. But just so you saw those points. Now let me go back over those one more time because it was confusing. All right, just so we know. The people that got these pins have certified for 2025. And that was from December 1st, 2023 to May 31st, May 31st, 2024. They are now certified for 2025. Volunteer hours and CEs from December 23 to December 2024 go to certification. So you still have plenty of time to get your certification for 2025. Beginning in January, the volunteer hours and the continuing education will start being recorded from January 1st through December 31st, 2025. And that will go toward the 2026 certification. I think the confusion is December 23 this year, so it caused some confusion. So we're trying to get back onto a calendar year. Also, beginning January 2025, the recertification will require 5 additional hours to 35 hours, 4 additional CEs, and still 2 monthly meetings. Hopefully that clears up the confusion. If it doesn't, please feel free to send a note and we will get it right. So, any questions? Rhonda, are you okay? Anything from you?
Nope, doing just fine.
Okay. Did it make sense to you what I was talking about with the recertification? Are we clear now, do you think?
Yeah, that's what I put in the chat for you is basically, essentially we have that 1 year to get certified for the next year. And then when that next year starts in January, we start working again for the year towards the next year after that.
That's perfect. Yep, that's right. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for all the hard work. I hope that was slower this time, so you got it all. I thought the container gardening by Renee was outstanding. And so I just appreciate everything you folks do. Have a nice day. Enjoy the rain. A nice weekend. And thank you very much.